Welcome into the Autzen Audibles podcast. I'm Prehm and Erik Skopil on the show as always, and today we bring on a guest for the first time with me, second time with Eric, Jared Kelly of Peegs.com, who covers the Indiana Hoosiers and the football program extensively. Jared, man, thanks for coming on the show. How things are going? How's your recovery from the Rose Bowl?
Recovery's been a little bit rough. Obviously, being on the West Coast 3 time zones away messed up my sleep schedule quite a bit there. But I mean, second time we're meeting this season, Indiana and Oregon. I definitely did not think we were going to get to this point at all, but here we are. It should be an exciting game week. It's weird, with the portal opening on Friday and everything happening this weekend. It's like I haven't even had a chance to wrap my head around all of this. But 4 days until the CFP semifinal, so let's do it.
Yeah, it's a wild time right now. It doesn't make sense. Oregon's coach has certainly been very vocal about that. A lot of coaches have across the country. But let's talk about back in October. From Indiana's perspective, how much does that October win at Autzen Stadium still matter, you feel like, into this rematch? And how much of that game film is actually relevant still today? Like, how much has Indiana, you feel like, changed since that game?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question in everybody's mind, right? And Kurt Signetti acknowledges, Dan Lanning acknowledges that it's so hard to beat a team twice, and in the same token, it's hard to lose to a team twice. And when you have these two caliber of teams, I think that's kind of the prevailing thought. But for Indiana, that win over Oregon, it was a statement win on so many levels. Not just in proving to Indiana and themselves that they could beat a big time opponent on the road like that, but I really think it was the fulcrum point, the defining moment that, hey, we can do this. And after that win, it was basically the launching pad for Indiana to go undefeated, Big Ten title, all of that. So it was huge that first time around for Indiana to really gain that confidence. But as it pertains to this game, I've always thought that you can say what you want about beating a team twice in the same season, how difficult it is. I don't really buy that narrative, especially when you have two high-level coaching staffs like this and two teams that are as fundamentally sound and know what they want to do. I think both teams are coming into this game looking at it as, this is almost 3 months later. This is going to be a completely new team we're facing, both schematically, and obviously Indiana's had some injuries. I'm sure Oregon has as well. So I think both teams are going to approach this as if this is the first time they're meeting. And, just like it was the first time around, I think this is going to be a super closely contested game. I would expect it's going to be a super tough for either team to win.
Jared, there's so many Oregon-Indiana narratives, but I wanted to ask you just about Indiana for a moment here. Last time we spoke, obviously, Indiana was coming off a big first year with Signetti in 24. They were undefeated going to that game, a top 10 team. You mentioned the Oregon element of it. What's just like, maybe go back to what your brain would be telling you in 23 after that season, that in the past month or so, beating Ohio State from an Indiana perspective to win a conference championship and then just absolutely boat racing Alabama. Like, those are two of the handful of blue bloods that matter every year. And for Indiana to win those games in such high leverage situations, like, just is this a pinch me season basically, or kind of like where is this fan base at now with those two particular games? Because you mentioned kind of the Oregon being the belief, but this is like a step ahead of that in these big moments, just take care of business time and time after again.
Yeah, I think for the large majority, it's still very much a fever dream. You're almost kind of waiting to wake up from that dream. But as the time's gone on, and obviously for Indiana, because they had the bye in the first round of the CFP, they had 3 weeks to kind of get used to the idea of, Indiana won the Big Ten championship. They beat Ohio State. Fernando Mendoza won the Heisman. There was a lot that went on in that time frame, but I think those 3 weeks kind of really helped not only the fan base, but also the program kind of settle down, get its feet back under them, which was important. So I think, and as the Rose Bowl approached and the CFP approached, I think there was a lot more of, Indiana reverting back to what it's done all season, which is, avoiding complacency, things like that, keeping the standards super high. And I think, Indiana teams of the past, they would not have been able to, stay so grounded after all the success they've had, but this team certainly has. And then, you think about the Alabama game, which, I was just as shocked as I think anybody was about the final result. I picked Indiana to win that game. I picked Indiana to win that game by 10 points. I did not expect it to go that way, where it was complete domination for 4 quarters. I think really what that Rose Bowl game showed is that Indiana, they are up there, if not the favorites. They're one of the favorites to win the national championship. To beat a team like Oregon with that much history, all that talent on the roster, I'm not sure how you could see it any other way for Indiana right now.
I want to go back to this year's team to last year's Indiana team real quick, because obviously they went 11-1 in the regular season. They made the college football playoff. They played Notre Dame. Their one loss, they weren't really – they were like close to getting blown out, but they weren't totally blown out by Ohio State, and then kind of felt like the same way against Notre Dame. But this time around, this team is better, and they've developed. Where do you feel that maturation has happened from year one to year two and from the Cignetti regime?
I think it's twofold, but I think the biggest part is what we've talked about already is that Oregon win was so important for so many reasons for this program. And obviously, you guys being on the flip side, it might be a little tougher for you guys to see it. But for Indiana, like to be able to go out there when you guys, Oregon was top 5 at the time, Autzen Stadium. I don't think you guys had lost there since 22. It was just it changed so much for Indiana in terms of mindset, because that was probably the biggest hurdle. Because Curt Cignetti, he's the biggest, most confident guy in the room, no matter what room he's in. But I think for him too, he kind of needed to see it and prove it to himself that, hey, I can lead my team into a top 5, one of the hardest venues in the country, and win. And after they proved that to themselves, I think that's when you kind of saw that switch flip for Indiana. Even going back to last year when they played Notre Dame and Ohio State and pretty much got dominated in both those games. They hadn't really proved that they could beat those caliber teams. So now that they did it, and they did it, against Oregon, what was it, like week 7 that they that Indiana and Oregon played, to have that opportunity midway through the season and to carry you through the rest of the season, I think that was really the biggest difference between what we're seeing now and what Indiana might have lacked from last year.
We're going to jump into some matchups in this game momentarily here, but just because Indiana is such a good story, I also wanted to ask about another one of, I think, the best stories in this team, and that's just Fernando Mendoza. And not only the fact that he's a Heisman Trophy winner, because every year somebody wins the Heisman, obviously not minimizing it, but we're not – so obviously someone wins it every time. But what this story just feels like it – not that it came out of nowhere, but that this is somebody who wasn't supposed to be on these radars. He wins this award. He has Indiana where they are now. Even if this is a 1 year, which it seems like it's going to be for him in Indiana, is it like the case for him as the school's greatest football player? Is it like unimpeachable at this point? Like where does it, like, have you guys done the mental exercises of like where Mendoza stack up amongst the Indiana guy? Like, I'm just curious on kind of his meaning, like just taking a step back, looking at the big history of everything.
Yeah, I mean, obviously first Heisman Trophy winner, program history has to be up there in some regard. There haven't been too many Indiana players that you can really put up against him. I'm not sure how too familiar you guys are, but like Antoine Randall, he was he finished, I think, top 10 finalist. He pretty much, when he was playing, that was when Indiana was really in the doldrums. So he pretty much had to carry those teams. The only reason he probably didn't finish higher in the Heisman when he was playing was because Indiana won like 3 or 4 games with him. But aside from that, yeah, I mean, Mendoza has to be up there. He's definitely on the Mount Rushmore of Indiana football players. Obviously debatable about greatest of all time. The longevity part, only having 1 season would probably hurt him a little bit in that regard. But we've talked about this so much after him winning the Heisman. I don't think Indiana can have a better representative and better ambassador for them to win the Heisman. And I think Tom Fornelli of the Cover 3 podcast actually said this about Mendoza. He's like, Mendoza is a golden retriever, whereas Cignetti's just a cold-blooded killer. So it's a funny dichotomy there, but it's true. I mean, Mendoza, he represents the program so well, everything you could possibly want. And somehow, some way, him and Curt Cignetti have just fit like a glove, even though they are 2 completely opposite, different people.
Speaking of those matchups that Eric talked about, we obviously know about the receiving core, the 2 big guys that they have, Surratt being maybe the primary big play guy, at least from an Oregon perspective of how he played in Eugene. But what can you say about Charlie Becker and just kind of his rise the last 4 or 5 games? 3 games over 100 yards. He's scored two of his 3 touchdowns in that span. Feels like he's probably kind of a wild card or matchup that can maybe decide how this game maybe plays out a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Becker because he was a guy that really wasn't featured at all when Indiana played Oregon the first time around, and I think and part of that was because Indiana had a full complement of receivers, and obviously Elijah Surratt has earned that role as wide receiver one. But when Surratt did get hurt, I think he missed about 2.5 games, down the stretch of the season, which really opened the door for Becker to play a lot more. And Indiana fans, at least on this side of the aisle, we knew what Becker was capable of. We knew his potential. But he really just needed kind of an opportunity to step in and play, and he got that opportunity. So you add him in as sort of that fourth element with EJ Williams, Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper. Indiana can do so many different things now. Obviously, it helps to keep guys fresh within games as well. But with Becker, 6'4", I think he surprises a lot of cornerbacks with how fast he is. He can get over the top of secondaries in a hurry. And I think Ohio State learned that the hard way as well. So that's one of the things, and he's such a good. I think he's taken after Elijah Surratt a lot in this way. Is he's such a good 50-50 ball winner. He high points balls really well. He's one of those guys that Fernando Mendoza can kind of just throw it up to, and he knows that Becker 9 times out of 10 will probably come down with it. So it's going to be really difficult for Oregon, but I'm sure that secondary, which was obviously young and inexperienced to open the season, as they've had more reps under their belt, they're going to be better prepared for this matchup. So it'll be very interesting to see how Indiana uses Becker, but he's going to be, I would expect him to be a big part of their game plan as he was in the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, kind of using a similar logic here to Matt, who pointed out a player who wasn't involved in the first matchup. And I'm just looking at PFF. I don't know if he even played in that game. Is that possible to you, Jared, that he wouldn't have played?
You talking about Becker?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so he played on special teams a lot. He was a special teams mainstay, but in terms of receiver, he might not have got. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't get on the field.
I want to ask you about a guy who played 43 snaps the last game and was really a really impactful part of this defense. That's Stephen Daly.
Mm-hmm.
Not having him, I was impressed with obviously 3 points allowed to Alabama in the first game without him. What have they done to kind of maintain the same level of disruptiveness, and how big of a loss was that for them? Because that was one of the mainstays on this defense, one of the big names to know.
Yeah, so Indiana has actually lost 2 of its most productive starting defensive ends this year. First, it was Kellen White. He was a Maryland transfer. He's playing super well. Suffered a torn ACL, I think, Game 7. Stephen Daly comes in. He's a Kent State transfer. Hardly misses a step. He actually finished the regular season leading the nation in tackles for loss. He probably should have been higher than an All Big Ten honorable mention. And then it was funny. Well, not funny, I guess, but it was quite the scene. Big Ten championship right after the game. Indiana's on the stage celebrating. Me and one of the guys I work with at Peague, we're standing next to Indiana's locker room, and all of a sudden we see Stephen Daly getting carted off the field with an air cast on. We're like, what is going on? And then, days later, it's confirmed that he's done for the season. So obviously hugely impactful. And that was a question going into the Rose Bowl game, is how is Indiana going to replace a guy that has 19.5 tackles for loss this season? And I think it really comes down to the defense is very much schematics based. I think a lot of these players thrive because of the scheme, not the other way around, right? Indiana doesn't depend on talent to win. They depend on good scheme that translates to production to win. So I think there's just so many parts that you can interchange with this defense. There's a ton of multiplicity on the defense where you can slide a defensive tackle to the defensive end spot, or you can slide a linebacker up to the line of scrimmage. There's so many different ways Indiana can beat you defensively and throw different looks at you that I don't think any one player was ever going to make or break this season. And obviously the Alabama game showed it.
Kind of touched on this a little bit, but I think Cignetti just has an abundance of confidence, and I love it. I remember watching the game, the media day press conference of his first one at the Big Ten last year. Eric got to go. I was watching it digitally, and I messaged him like when he went onto the podium, just like, this might be my favorite coach in the Big Ten. Like, just unbelievable confidence. How talk a little bit about that the Oregon win kind of opening the confidence even more for this team, but just what's kind of the mentality now? Has it shifted from like a dream season to now like we're going to win this whole damn thing, like type mentality? Have you seen that happen with this Indiana team and the confidence they have right now?
Oh yeah, and I think even before the Oregon game, like you think about that Illinois game where Illinois was ranked I think 9th in the country at that time, and Indiana just boat raced them in the Big Ten opener. Like that was a huge confidence boost for them too. But all season, like even thinking back to the preseason, and this might have been more wishful thinking than obviously the reality that it is now, but even in the preseason, guys were talking about Big Ten championship and national championship goals. And that's only strengthened and become more real as the season has gone along. But obviously in this case now, Indiana is fully locked into winning the national championship. Even after coming out of that Big Ten title game, it was all eyes on the Rose Bowl. And then we even had as I'm sure you guys did, we had an open locker room after the Rose Bowl game. We had a chance to talk to players, and every single one of them, I asked them one by one. I was like, "You guys gonna celebrate this one?" Every single guy was like, "Nope, onto the CFP semifinal, onto Oregon." So I think that mindset has really carried over. Obviously, it starts at the top with Kurt Cignetti. He's the most stone cold guy you're gonna find. So it really trickles down, and I think you see that day in day out with Indiana.
I just looked a little closer. Becker did play 10 snaps in that game. Just one target, no catches. One to kind of now that I saw that, I thought I'd point that out. I'm curious on, and this was something that was such a big talking point going into the first matchup, was just Oregon's pass rush against Indiana's offensive line. We saw how that won. Like, Indiana won far, far more than they lost there. How has that translated the rest of the season? I kind of asked it because when these games have gotten a little bit muddier, and there's been several for Indiana, even with the unbeaten run here, games that were just kind of tight towards the end. I think of Penn State in particular. What have they kind of been able to do? What kind of confidence do they have coming against an Oregon defense, which I think just played pretty clearly its best game of the season and seems to be kind of coming on here? I'm curious on that matchup from your perspective, this Indiana offensive line facing this Oregon front.
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be wrinkles in there that are different than the last time. I remember when Indiana played Oregon the first time, one of the things Oregon's D-line was doing, and it actually forced Indiana a lot more penalties than we've seen, is those shifts like right before they snap the ball. And I know a lot of Indiana fans wanted illegal shifts and stuff like that, but it worked in Oregon's favor because I think Indiana got flagged for a couple false starts. There was a couple delayed games, things like that. So I wonder if Oregon tries to keep Indiana off balance a little bit in that way pre-snap. But we've seen it. This Indiana offensive line has gotten better and better as the season's gone along. The run game, they gashed Alabama for 215 yards. They're averaging like 220 on the ground per game this season. So just really, really good run game. I think the protection has really picked up too, where Indiana has struggled this season, and it really got better in the Alabama game. But, against Penn State, especially against Iowa, a little bit against Oregon, was when teams bring blitzes. A lot of teams like to sort of all out blitz against Indiana, play zero coverage and send like 7 or 8 at Fernando Mendoza. That's where obviously you're going to have to slide some protection, max protect, use a running back, tight end, what have you. That's where Indiana's got caught in some trouble this year. They did a good job against Alabama in that regard. I think Indiana's offensive line holds up pretty well when it just comes to just sending 4. But when you're sending blitzes and stuff like that, it's really giving Indiana some trouble this season. So I'll be curious to see how Oregon, Tosh Lupoi, they kind of try to dial up and find ways to get after Mendoza. But otherwise, it's going to be really tough against this Indiana team because they play such a balanced attack. They run the ball well. They pass the ball well. It's so hard to key in on any one area.
A lot of defensive players today, for the Oregon media perspective, spoke about Mendoza and his playmaking ability. Naturally, we think about his arm, right? Like 36 touchdowns, over 3,100 yards passing now, and high completion percentage rate. But Oregon's linebacker Bryce Betcher brought up how he's actually a sneaky good rusher. And then Mateo Uyunglele, their star edge rusher, he's not like Damon Williams, Washington, where he's running around like crazy, but his knowledge and understanding of when to scramble and what angles to take have been really impressive. Just, can you speak to maybe just the impact that has, and maybe have they built that into the game plan at all? Not for this game particularly, but do they lean into his running ability at all?
Yeah, I think they've certainly leveraged it more as the season's gone along, and he's gotten more comfortable in the system, in the pocket. There have been times this year where they will run a design quarterback draw, quarterback power when they need 3 or 4 or 5 yards, and Mendoza can do that. I think the Alabama game opened up a lot of eyes to a lot of people that, hey, he's not just a statue passer. He's more athletic than people give him credit for, quite honestly. There was a couple of runs where it was like, I have no clue how he got out of some of those sacks, but he turned them into 5, 6, 7-yard gains. He's far more of an improviser, I'd call him, than he is a scrambler. He's the type of guy that's going to keep his eyes downfield, and he's going to throw more often than not when he's on the move. But if he does need to pick up a couple of yards, he's more than willing to go get it. And I think that just comes with maturity. He does a good job of processing and scanning the field, but he also, I think this season, especially as the season's gone along, you've seen his internal clock really speed up. And that's made a huge difference for him in the offense.
Jared, I'm curious, as somebody who unfortunately didn't get to watch a ton of the Rose Bowl because it was just directly after the Orange Bowl and didn't get a great sense of kind of the dynamics in the crowd. How did Indiana travel there?
Oh, it was crazy. I mean, you would have thought it was an Indiana home game at the Rose Bowl. Like, probably if I had to guess, like 70-30 maybe in favor of Indiana. It was loud for Indiana. There's a lot of boos for Alabama. And to Bama's credit, right? Like, this is a normal thing for them every year, right? They're used to going to the CFP. So they probably didn't travel as well out to the West Coast. This was Indiana's second only time in the Rose Bowl. So I do give Alabama some leniency there, but it was loud. And, this could be a similar circumstance here in Atlanta where Oregon is not an easy place to travel to for Oregon fans. So we'll see. But a lot of Indiana fans do live in the Atlanta area. I'd like to think that Indiana probably will have the edge in terms of fans, but we'll see how many Oregon fans make the trip down.
Yeah, because I was going to say, Matt, I think it was maybe 90-10, 85-15 Tech in Orange Bowl. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I walked around the stadium pregame, and we Eric and I both kind of expected it to be a pretty stark contrast, but it was drastically 10-1. Yeah. Tech fan to Oregon fan. And to your point that you made about Indiana and the Rose Bowl, this was Texas Tech's version of that as well. It was their best game ever. I do think there was some hedging by Oregon fans that they said that they'll risk not being at the first game and losing, and there's no game after that, and then going to the next two just because of the travel that's required to that. Because driving is not an option for most Duck fans really to get to this game in time.
Yeah, and Jared, you kind of already answered my part, my second part here, which was just what is the expectation for Indiana? But it sounds like I think Oregon's going to be basically playing, if depending upon how far they go, in a road environment every game outside of the JMU game. And I was just curious to kind of get a sense from you of what your expectations are from a Hoosier turnout down in Atlanta.
Yeah, no, that's certainly fair, and I would expect the same thing probably in terms of fan attendance here in the Peach Bowl, and I think for a lot of Indiana fans too, like we've talked about, like this is very much a once in a generation, maybe once in two generation type deals for them, to where they see this entire CFP run as you're playing with house money. Like, why not we get a chance to go to the Peach Bowl? Why not? We get a chance to go to the Rose Bowl. We're gonna spend whatever it takes to get there because it might not happen again. So it's very much, not only is it because Indiana's playing obviously a critical semifinal game, but also just a chance to go and experience this for Indiana fans like they never had before. It's definitely a factor into it. So I'll be interested to see. Obviously the Rose Bowl with Alabama and Indiana both wearing red, it was a little tougher to see in terms of color. This game we should be able to tell a little bit more the disparity, but I will be very curious to see what the crowd split's like.
Jared, thanks for coming on the show, man. Really appreciate the insight into Indiana and the Hoosiers. We'll meet you in the press box. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast. We'll be later back this week with more diving into this game. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.